I got one bit of bad news for you. When Tim left to go on his vacation, he did not leave me with his Sunday joke book. So, well, you have a joke?
I was going to bring the cartoon. The kid was telling the pastor at the end of the sermon, God answered my prayers, you didn't talk too long.
That one hits pretty close to home with me anyway, so, but yeah, we're going to talk about surrender, but I need to preface it with a few things. And right off the top also, I want to make an apology because I'm going to be chopping up a little bit of Jo May's stuff up here. She does such an excellent job putting everything together. And me, being non-compliant as I am, didn't have the stuff that I needed to her in time to get it into the PowerPoint. So we're going to be jumping applications on a computer. So don't mind what goes on back there. I've got a computer wizard back here right now. No, I don't. Okay. Well, I'm going to be starting off in Proverbs 2. And you say, okay, we're going to talk about surrender, but why are we going over to Proverbs 2? Why are we going to talk about understanding and wisdom and things like that? Because it's all tied together. There's nothing in God's economy that isn't laced together. There is no fragmentation. There's nothing like that in His world. Everything's got a symmetry to it. Everything's got a flow to it. The problem is we don't understand it. But with Proverbs 2, I'm going to read verses 1 through 9. It says, My son, if you receive my words and treasure my commands within you, so that you incline your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding, yes, if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, and if you seek her as silver and search for her as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright, and he is a shield for those who walk uprightly. He guards the paths of justice and preserves the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice, equity, and every good path. Well, if we go back up to verse 1, where it says in there, and treasure commands within you, if you take that back into the King James, it's not treasure, it's hide. You hide his commands within you. There's a difference. I can treasure them and value them, but never really take them in. As opposed to, when I hide them, I open my soul up to let God's commands, his ways, come into me. That's a first level surrender. When I open myself up to allow God to plant something within me. It's kind of noteworthy that in 9 verses out of one of the Proverbs, he mentions understanding 5 times. Deb gave a very good discussion on wisdom here a couple weeks ago. And I would advocate to you that understanding is a sister to wisdom. They work hand in hand. They walk together. Where you find one, you will find the other in some degree. But the thing about understanding is this. I go out and look into my world, and I come up with something that sort of tells me the way that things work. And so I assume I have understanding of it. And so what happens inside of me, that becomes one of my truths. That becomes something that I rely on to be a truth. It might not be a truth, but I see it as a truth. This is the birthplace of what's called relativism, where I can have an understanding of, we can look at one event, I can have an understanding of it. Sheila, you can have an understanding of it. Deb, you can have an understanding of it. And so each one of us have an understanding of it, but they're all different. So we each have a different truth. Now comes man's pride and ego, when we stand back and say, well, I know how to resolve the issue of differences in truth. We all just have our own truth. You don't step on mine, and I won't step on yours. And we'll just live with whatever truth makes us happy and comfortable. But that's not God's way. His truth is truth. And we're supposed to search it out, diligently seek it. There's a reason why Jesus talked to the people in parables. Because hearing with your mind isn't enough. You got to hear with your heart. He's talking to the soul. He's not talking to the intellect. You know? When we seek it, if you seek her as, well, let me back up just a little bit. Yes, if you cry out for discernment, which is akin to knowledge and understanding, but that's the application of knowledge and understanding. When we discern something, we're dividing. We're sweeping the stuff out of the way and looking at truth. You know. But if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, and in this term, it's called taban. That is a Hebrew term, and what it means is it's the object of knowledge. My understanding that I come to because of knowledge. Now, what's the basis of our knowledge? Well, as Daryl kind of alluded to, we have a tendency to formulate our own little thing that we call knowledge. And what it does is it works very well to justify us when we don't want to go God's way. And so what we do is we minimize something in here that's very important. And I need to talk about this for a second before we go anywhere else. The fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is different from the fear of the Lord. What I mean on one side is if I don't believe in God, I've got a different kind of a fear than if I do believe in God. When you look into God's creation, do you see a wildness there? I got a question for you. Is God dangerous?
He can be.
Is God dangerous? Look at his creation. It testifies to that, exactly that. Who invented hurricanes? Who created volcanoes? And on the other side of it, who created that beautiful meadow way up high in the mountains, or that pristine mountain lake, you know? There's a wildness in God that scares the devil. Well, doesn't really scare, it should scare the devil out of us anyway. But there's a wildness in God that he's calling us towards, but we resist it because we want this common sense stuff, you know. Old-time religion was exactly that. It was religion that said, okay, here we got all these rules and stuff like this. This makes us good people. That's not what God said. You see, religion devoid of a relationship with Jesus Christ is nothing more than a set of rules and us dominating each other. It's the same thing over and over. It doesn't matter whether it's a government doing it or a church that's just based in rules, legalism. But what's God calling us to? He's calling us into a relationship with him. Two more proverbs that kind of bring this together. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That's Proverbs 1:7. But the fools despise wisdom and instruction. And then Proverbs 9 tells us the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. He just mentioned both of the sisters. Right there. Both of them are related to what? The fear of the Lord. Now then, we talked about the unbeliever's side of the fear of the Lord. The believer's side of the fear of the Lord in Hebrew, yirah. What it means is respect, reverence, piety. In other words, when we reach this point in our walk with God, that God is so high and so far above us that we can't even begin to conceive of him, then we're starting to get close to where he needs to be. Because what it does is that if he's not there, we're going to put him down here, because then what we can do is we can shave him, trim him down, put him in, because we have to put him in a box so we can put him on a shelf when we're going to go do what we want to do. And so what we have to do is we have to diminish God in order to exercise our own will. Now this is the seesaw. This is the thing that doesn't work. I cannot exercise my will and be in God's will at the same time. Okay? In understanding what God really is, I didn't want to get into a huge amount of stuff here, but Psalm 139 tells us, I know you're sitting down and you're rising up. You understand my thoughts from far off. You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all of my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, Lord, you know it altogether. We do an exercise when I do the classes for people just coming in to join the church. One of them is that you take two people, not married. That creates a whole different set of problems. You take two people who just sort of kind of roughly know each other, and you have them sit in a chair, slide their chairs together so you kind of knee to knee like that, and you look each other in the eye. And it's not a stare down or anything like that. It's just, you're just sitting there and you're looking at somebody. What you've invaded their space. And it's because I ask you to. But you have invaded their space. And what happens is the two of you sit there and you look at each other. What do you think goes on in your mind? Are you assessing the other person? No, not really. What you're doing is you're going to start coming into connection with your own insecurity. You're going to come into connection with that part of you that says you're too close. You know, you're inside my safety zone. You know, the drawbridge that was on the front of that little strong hold of mine that I've got inside of me was only down for a second. You snuck in, be gone, whatever, like that. But what it means is that this exercise is to put me in touch with the fact that there's so much inside of me that I really don't want other people to know. I really don't want anybody connecting with. Yet that passage that I just read to you said, God's all over inside of that. So what are you really hiding? Why are you hiding anything from him? Because our basic human nature says, no, this is me. I am in control of this. You can't touch it. Anybody in this room believe they're in 100% control of their life? We try to be. But let me bring up a couple things. Let me ask a couple questions. Why did you take the name that you got? Now, if you're in control of your life, you should have been able to name yourself. Why do you live the way you live? Because so much of it doesn't work out right. You knew it going in, so why did you do it? Okay. Why do you think that when you jump in your car and you go rolling down the highway that you've got total control of what's going on around you? Or someone else coming the other way who's in total control of what they're doing too, and the two of you may just wind up getting into a collision. Did you choose to wreck? You didn't have any control. There's somebody else involved in that. Around you, there's people everywhere. You don't have complete control. Humanity tends to be a real sloppy business. And so there isn't any control in that. So what it is, it's a facade. We see that inside of us something that's not a reality. So in other words, we have an altered truth, and it's ours. Now, what I'd like to do is to examine something quickly here. I'm going to jump over to Ecclesiastes 3. He says, he has made, 3:11, he says, he has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. Eternity in our hearts. What does that mean? When, let me try to frame this right. When a biological function results in a conception, in other words, baby on the way, what happens is, from Psalms and from Jeremiah both, it tells us that God created us. He knit us together. So what I'm saying to you is, he took from his eternity the soul that he had prepared for you, and he knit it into the flesh that was growing in your mother's womb. You came out of eternity to him. And you will live your life out, go through the span of your life here, and then somewhere down the road, as Ecclesiastes 12 tells us, then dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to the God who gave it. So in other words, this fleshly thing that we spend so much time with is going in a box in the ground, you know. But the other part, the part that God knit together and put into you, that we spend so little time paying attention to, is the part that one day God is going to reclaim. It's his. You're not your own, you're his. And it's always been like that. Now then, there are unbelievers. They have that same eternity in their heart also, but what happens is the more you deny it, the more calloused your heart gets. Think about the book of Revelations. When the judgments are poured out on the people on this earth, what do? Are they praying out to God? No, they curse God. So much hardening and hardening and hardening and hardening. But the other side of that is in the believer, where God is giving you a new heart. He's taking out that heart of stone. He's putting in that heart of flesh, and he's pulling you and bringing you towards him. But he also is a God who gives choice. We've always had the choice. You don't have to listen. You can go your own path. You can go your own way. You can do anything you want to do. He leaves it up to you. But he lays truth in front of you. Are you willing to pick up the truth? Or would you rather just kind of kick it under the carpet because it's really sort of inconvenient? I had planned doing this stuff over here, and it really doesn't kind of comply, you know. So I was going to live a little bit differently in the midst of all this. Well, what happens in that is that in 2 Corinthians 2, I don't think you've got this in your sheet, because I added a bunch more stuff that I was going through. 2 Corinthians 2, 14 through 16 tells us, "Now thanks be to God who always leads us in a triumph in Christ, and through us diffuses the fragrance of his knowledge in every place. For we are to God the fragrance of Christ among those who are being saved and among those who are perishing. To the one, we are the aroma of death leading to death. And to the other, the aroma of life leading to life." Eternity testifies to the unbeliever just like it does to the believer. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. But all of it is leading to judgment time. And so what we have in us as believers is that life that God gives us. And you've heard the term born again. It got really, really overused, 20 years ago. What it really means is born from on high. In other words, God woke up my soul. Because when I started my walk through this world, everything is me. I'm living off the fleshly side of everything. And my soul is basically starving to death because it's not being fed. Because what does the soul eat? The Word. It feeds on the Word. That's where it gets its nourishment. It's where the soul grows. And so what I did instead is I walked through my life. Soul's pretty much dying off. I wasn't paying attention to it anyway. So I'm just living out my life and doing the things I wanted to do. The Lord got a hold of me. You don't hear with your intellect. You hear with your heart when he starts talking to you. And when the heart starts responding to that, I gave my life to him at the cross. And when I gave my life to him at the cross, that was my entire life, all of it. I laid it down. And what he did was, when I was born again, that means that my soul takes the lead and we put the flesh in the trailer. So now we live differently. But that doesn't mean it's all over with. The stop at the cross is only a very temporary thing, because there's a place we have to go to from the cross. We go from eternity to the cross, and then we go from the cross to eternity. God's waiting on us on the other end of it. He's with us here. He's instilled in us now, but he's also refining us, drawing us closer to him, pulling us to him. And what does that take? You got to give it to him. You want to hold on to it? He'll let you hold on to it, but it ain't going to work out right. So what he wants to do is he wants to continue this refinement process. We'll go into that a little bit more here in just a minute. But Luke 12:20 tells us, God said to the guy who built the big barns and everything, filled them up, said, now I can kick back and party and do all this stuff like that. Well, what did he have to say to him? This night your soul will be required. Apateo. Greek. And what it means is demanded of you. In other words, there will be a time when the body lays down and your soul, which is owned by God, will be demanded of you. It's his. He can just say, it's time to give it back. Kind of a hard thing to take a look at, but it's a true thing to take a look at. Now then, suppose you get up in the morning and you're going to do your devotions, and you sit there in the morning and it all starts off like this. Job 38, 1-4. Then the Lord said to Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man, and I will question you, and you shall answer me. Does that give you an indicator of what the rest of your day is going to be like? It's very, very inconvenient to recognize God as God, because it gets in the way of so much that we want to do. Doing it the way we want to do. Seeing life the way we want to see it. But it's not right. It's not the right way. We're going to jump over to a video right now. And this is from Mike Doney. He is the lead singer for 10th Avenue North. Yes, ma'am.
I've called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, it will not consume you. You will not be burned. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Now, if I'm real honest, there's parts of this I don't like. I don't like that it says, when you pass through the water. I don't like that. I want it to say, when you walk on top of the water, right? I don't like the part that says, when you go through the fire. I want it to say, I'm going to lead you around the fire, right? Like, it's going to get hot, not too hot. But it's not what it says here. It says, when you walk through them, I will be with you in the midst. You know, Jesus' name is Emmanuel. That means God is with us. He's with us in the water, in the fire, in triumph and in tragedy. Even though tragedy has a way of calling that into question, right? I mean, tragedy hits, and no matter what we've read, we say, God, I just don't think you're there, right? Like, where did you go? We just had a season of doubt like this. We went through a trial. I mean, our guitarist, Jeff, his sister-in-law, so his brother's wife, Ferris, she's 32, she's got 3 kids, and she gets diagnosed with stage 4 cancer this year. And they're saying, you know, she could go to England for this experimental treatment. Like, chemotherapy is going to be so intense, it's going to be at least a year. And we don't know how to process this. We kind of reel back and we say, God, how could you let this happen? How could you let a bad thing happen to such a good person? You ever been there? And I was in the middle of kind of questioning God about this when I felt like God questioned me. I said, God, why is this happening? And he said, why do you call Good Friday Good Friday? I said, what? What you mean? What's that got to do with anything, God? I'm asking you why bad things happen, and you're asking me why Good Friday is Good Friday? What are you talking about? And he just repeats the question. He says, why do you call Good Friday Good Friday? And I said, 'cause that's what they call it at church. That's what they put on the calendar. And he said, I just want to remind you that Good Friday wasn't the day when bad things happened to a good person. Good Friday is the day when the worst things happen to the best person. And you call that good. Maybe you call Good Friday Good Friday because you know what happens on Sunday. But don't forget, Good Friday was the worst Friday until Easter morning. So we wrote this song, I Have This Hope, for Jeff's sister. And we wrote it for her so that when she started chemotherapy, she'd have these promises to listen to, right? And she loved the song. We sent her this demo. Well, fast forward 3 months, right? She's supposed to have chemo for 11 to 12 months, right? And 3 months later, we're in the studio about to record the album version of this song. And she says, I gotta be there. So she shows up to the studio, you know, her hair's all falling out, she's weak from the treatment, but she sits down on the couch. I'm not making this up. The day we're gonna hit record on this song, she sits down on the couch, and 5 minutes later, she gets a text from Vanderbilt Hospital saying her cancer is officially in remission. Boom. Mic drop. Now, I know not every story ends with a miracle like that. I want to be sensitive to this. But I also want to say that I believe that miracles are always possible. But I also want a faith that believes God's good even while I'm waiting on the miracle to happen. I want to believe that God is with me not only in my triumphs, but in my tragedies. In my tragedies, you know what I need to do? I need to look to the cross. And I need to listen to Jesus saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? As if to say, even in my doubts, even in my questions, even there, Jesus is with me. So I have this hope now that Jesus is everywhere. I mean, he's enthroned in heaven, and he chased us all the way down into hell. So he's with us, always. There is not a place where we can go where he is not.
In the flood or the fire, you are with me, and you won't let go.
A little better than 20 years ago, I didn't choose to have cancer, but I did. And God carried me through that. And he set me on a different path, a different way of life. Billy Graham talks about there's two dimensions to God's will. The first dimension is called a general dimension, and what that means is that's that salvation at the cross that he's extended to everybody. That's that part that he says, come to me. That is a surrender. You go to the cross, you're surrendering. And what you're supposed to be doing when you go there is lay your entire life down at the cross. Because what comes out of that is salvation, adoption back into the family, restoration, the regeneration that's coming about, and a rebirth, that born from on high, aka born again part like that. In other words, you become a child of God. That's where he wants us to be. That's what he wants us to be. But we can't take our suitcase full of all the other stuff that we want to have with us and go to him. We have to take that and lay it down at the foot of the cross with everything else. In other words, be the offering. Instead of a cow going up onto a platform to be burnt, you're the offering. And out of that offering, there's great things that he wants for you. And you see, the second part of that is God's will for your personal life. He built you with talents. He built you with capabilities. He built you with interests. And he didn't do it so you could go chasing off into the world and, dancing with the stars or whatever you want to do, anything like that. He built those things into you so that when you surrender into him, you're drawn more into him. Those are the things that you're going to just take out into a world that's hurting and a world that needs to see a loving God. And that's the beginning of the formulation of it. And I'm going to finish up here in just a second. Bear with me on this. Because, you see, we're called into understanding that God loves us so very much that he's not asking us to throw away our life. He's asking us to give it to him. And what he does is he knocks off all the junk. And what you get in that life is absolute true freedom. He doesn't like to see his children bound up. It's kind of like, would you please put the handcuffs back on me? I've gone to the cross and he's taken them off. But because there's so many things in my life that I want to just keep on doing, I'm asking, will you please just put it back on? Let me have them again. Okay. There is, in that personal part, what he's doing is that's refinement and growth through surrendering into his will. Now you got your choice. You can either have your will or you can have his will. And what you're going to find out is the things that you give to him, a lot of times what he does is knocks the dust off of them and gives them back to you. But now you live that life through him. And that's where he wants you to be. That's relationship. Because the book of Matthew chapter 7 tells us that there's going to be people who are going to run up to him and say, Lord, Lord, Lord. He's going to say, oh man, I don't even know you. Those are the religious people. There's a different group that spent their life getting acquainted with Jesus Christ. Those are his children, and those are the ones that will go with him. That warning in Matthew is not for the unbelievers, that's for the believers. Because sometimes we believe the things that allow us to have a structure and we have some power over the God life. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. He's the one with the power, not me. I've talked to you about this before, and in closing, I'd like to bring it up again real quickly. Zechariah 13:9 tells us, I will bring the 1/3 through the fire, will refine them as silver is refined, and test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say, this is my people, and each one will say, the Lord is my God. There's a process that I've referred to before called the crucible principle. And I want to bring it up again here because this is the key in surrendering into God. Everybody know what a crucible is. It's a big heavy pot. You take silver or gold when you're going to refine it. You put it on a fire and get it really hot, and you put your silver in there. Silver being a heavy metal, when it melts, what happens is impurities, dirt, and things like that that's inside of it are lighter, so they come to the top. And the refiner can skim them off. That's what God's doing to us. Anybody ever been in a situation where it's not just walking through the fire? Man, you've been laying on the barbecue grill. You are at this point where you just simply cry out to God because there's nothing else. Nothing. You can't even understand it. And God allows that heat in your life Because your soul is to him like a big chunk of silver or a big chunk of gold. And so what he's doing is that when the things in this life, that thing that is just wanting to crush me, heats up my being, then what God is doing is he's taking my soul and those little dark spots that I'm hanging on to where I insist on having my way, he's picking them out a little bit at a time, and he's refining me. And what happens off of that is I'm freed. There's something else, another little bit of freedom, and another little bit of freedom, and a closer walk with God in each one of these things. I mean, some of you guys have been through some big things. When you held on to God at the end of them, did you feel different? Did you feel like, yeah, he was there? I didn't think he was. I didn't know he was. Because you see, we only see things in retrospect. We only see blessings after the fact. Most of the time we're so busy with, oh, poor little me's and things like that, that we don't see the blessing at work. Or sometimes the blessing itself takes so long to develop and come out. Because maybe it's not even for me. There's a school shooting down in Florida. Terrible thing. It's all based in hatreds, you know, and things like that. I just went through a 3-hour-long session on active shooter mitigations. And part of what we talked about in there, the key core element that causes those shootings like that is hatred. Hatred that's welled up because of people who were bullied or people who were, you know, there's so many different factors that can come into it, but the end product of it is hatred. Okay? So when we as Christians, when we start our walk and we get into the fire, what's the answer? You hold on to God. You don't understand it. Matter of fact, that's why I started this off with understanding. There's going to be a time that you have to understand that you're not going to understand. That's where faith steps in. And that's where trust steps in. Do you have faith in God? Do you trust him? Not to give me the outcome I want. Because in all honesty, folks, sometimes the healing means going home. Going home to be with the Lord. That is the healing sometimes. We come through wanting the miracle all the time, the miracle. And they're great to see. I'm like, yeah, we've seen them. You know. But the other part of the reality is that what God has said in this is, you're coming back to my eternity. And each one of us has a day to go. You know, it sounds like a hard thing to say, but perhaps that school shooting down there, it was those kids' day to go. And I'm not trying to say it flippantly. I'm not, you know, just trying to excuse it all off or anything like that. But our picture is so very narrow. We don't deserve to try to be in control. So in closing, what I really want to say about this is that I don't know when I'm going to go home to be with the Lord. I just trust that it'll be in his time, his way. And that in the meantime, I can hang on to him just like the woman who grabbed a hold of his hem to be healed from a 12-year infirmity. That I can hang on to him and just do the things he leads me to do. It's not about obligation. It's not about duty. It's purely, completely about love. Father, we don't know the answers.